Well, hello, X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. My name is Frank Lavinia, and there we go. Here's my lower third. Um, so you may notice, actually, it's not on the screen, but I got a new desk. I'm real excited about this. So I got a new desk. It's a standing desk. It's a adjustable height desk from Costco. Let me pan over to see it. What's really cool about this is that I can hit different buttons and it goes to a predefined height, which is something that this desk here I'm on actually is also standing desk. So I put them together because that way I can kind of, pace and things like that. And, kind of one of the, granted, is a first world problem, right? One of the challenges with the standing desk is that only one desk goes all the way out like this. The other ones don't. Right, kind of walk around and think and kind of have multiple things at once. It's really a space for me to harness all of my kinetic energy. So with that, I'd like to give a shortened version of a speech presentation I gave Friday at the event that Tim McAlilly and Prashant Boyer, I think that's his last name, organized out of Reston, Virginia, and because it was the snow day, I had to do it remotely. So, which was good because it's always good when you can kind of not cancel an event, which I think is going to be the practical upshot of the post-pandemic world. So, with that, I'm going to advance on the slide. And first, this is a commercial for Red Hat OpenShift AI. If you want to know more about Red Hat OpenShift AI, I highly recommend you check out some of the other material and content that I've shared and check it out. And one more commercial, and I swear we move on to the actual content. For those you don't know, co-host of the Data Driven Podcast. We had a great show. New show is going to be dropping tomorrow, so check it out. And no, despite the questions I've gotten, we do not print the podcasts onto vinyl. Although I think that'd be very cool. I think someone is missing a business opportunity there. All right, so this is the two things you really have to remember when you're dealing with large language models. At a minimum, right? There's plenty more to think about. But I would say that first off, you have to remember at all times when you're dealing with AI, it's not magic, it's math, right? Whether or not when you and I think, we're going to adjust the height on that. When you and I think, is it magic? Is it consciousness? Is consciousness math? That is a debate for philosophers. But if you're an engineer working in the large language model space, you can kind of put that argument on the shelf and save it for another day. And these systems are also non-deterministic, right? They are largely based on randomized parameters, which is a fancy way of saying that you're not always going to get the same output, right? Because there is some randomness to it, right? 2 + 2 is not always equal to 4, right? It's X + Y, and X and Y are both kind of quasi-random or stochastic, I think would be the exact word. The other thing, a couple more things to think about is to think like a philosopher. So, and that the question matters more than the answer. And this was something I had heard when I was a young man, and I was in university. I went to a Jesuit university, and my philosophy professor was himself a Jesuit, very old, very wise man. And he said basically, the question. What's more important, the question or the answer? And all of us thought, well, of course, the answer, because that's why there's a question. And his point was that really it's the question that shapes the answer and that makes it more important. And that is very true in the prompt engineering space, because you are trying to get an AI to do something, and the question you ask very much shapes the answer. And there's a debate going on right now, right? Is prompt engineer going to be the That hot new skill is going to be the data scientist top job title of the 20s. I don't know, because when you look at how the industry is evolving, AI is being infused into a number of products, right? Microsoft has added Copilot to just about everything. Obviously, first was GitHub, then Visual Studio. Windows 11 has a Copilot feature. Ansible has something called Lightspeed. I mean, the Copilot is, I think prompt engineering is just going to be part and parcel of how anyone does any work in their main line of work. So it's not going to be, I think it's going to be a required skill or an assumed skill. Much like if you're hiring a data scientist, they know Excel, right? You don't even ask, right? You don't ask developers, hey, do you know Microsoft Word, right? I just think it's going to become an assumed skill in the future. And the next step is kind of, what are the basics of prompt engineering? I think that one of the basics is the components of your prompt. And this is what helps shape the answer, right? So none of these are really hard and fast yet. I think this is too new to say, hey, Frank says that there's 4 of these, right? And that's it. I don't think this is ready for drywall. It's certainly not ready for concrete. Some things are obviously, I think, a little more developed than others. But I think, first off, the instruction, right? The core directive, right? What are you trying to get the large language model to do? Write a poem, generate a list of ideas, right? Now, I could go to ChatGPT and bang out, hey, generate a list of ideas. It's going to say, okay, about what, right? And that's where the next 3 kind of come into play, right? The context, right? Provide a topic or setting a scenario, right? Writing a list about, what I should do this weekend, right? And what are 10 fun things to do in the snow, or what are 10 fun things to know about open source? I don't know, right? That adds context. And thirdly, I would say requirements, right? Do you have any extra parameters here, right? That can change it. Like, do you want it the formal style? Do you want it to, when I say come up with a list, well, is it a list of 10 or a list of 1,000, right? Either is, without enough context, either is equally valid, right? From the LLM's point of view. And then finally, tone and style, right? This is optional, but if you were writing something for your family or your friends, or you're coming up with a list of jokes, that sort of thing. You want the tone, right? Who's the target audience, right? So you really have to think about this. And other types of prompt engineering, and this is certainly not ready for drywall. I would say I would mark this out in tape right now, right? Because you can have open-ended prompts, right? Describe a futuristic city is the example, right? It's going to use its, for lack of a better term, creativity to explore a topic without any kind of constraints. Now, that has no constraints, so that's the upside. The downside is no constraints, so you never really got to control what you want. Again, that's what you're looking for. That's exactly what to do. And directive, right? Directive would be, give it a specific type of thing. List 5 steps for creating a budget, right? Well, again, going back to the previous slide, right? List 5 steps, context, limitation is 5 steps, and then creating a budget is the context. Creative. Now, there's a lot of debate of, can AI be creative? And I would say, yes, it can be creative. It can mimic creativity for sure, but there's really no consciousness going on there. Obviously, there's going to be some debate about that, but I would say as of today, as of January 22nd, 2024, these systems are not conscious, right? Over the weekend or Friday, Mark Zuckerberg announced that his plan is to create an open source AGI, which, I'm a big fan of open source in AI model development. I don't know if Facebook is really the ones we want to do that, because I don't think, not a knock on him personally, not a knock on that, but there have been issues with how they handle data and what their definition of privacy and ethics are. They have a very different definition, I would say, mainstream society. Another type of prompt is informational, explanatory, right? Example is how does photosynthesis work, right? I would say, how does photosynthesis work? And it'll give me a definition, right? And I like this because this is really where search engines are going to be kind of in trouble, for lack of a better term, because let me do the laser pointer. No, it won't. All right, so this is where search engines are in trouble because it will write a custom article for me, right? So if I could say, hey, you know what, I started my college career as a chemical engineer, right? So you can talk to me like that, but it's been a while since I did chemistry. Can you explain it in a way a software engineer would understand, right? It'll do that. Explain it in a way that your 10-year-old don't understand, right? You have that kind of control about that, which is something you really don't get with search engines, right? Search engines were never built for that. Search engines were meant to index all of human knowledge and then kind of point you to where these things work. LLMs are built to index human knowledge. Well, human language just happens to pick up knowledge along the way and then be able to interact with you in that way. Now, this I think is the most underrated type because this is where the rubber's going to meet the road in terms of transformative power of generative AI in educational markets, right? Because I could come up with a custom lesson plan. In fact, there's a number of YouTubers. One guy in particular was the first I saw it. He is an intermediate Spanish speaker. And if you've ever done anything, learn a language, shoot archery, and you get that intermediate level, there's plenty of material out there for new people to a language. Languages in particular, right? Obviously, if there's millions of native speakers of a language, there's going to be plenty of content out there for you to consume. But that's really kind of the advanced scale. Beginners have a lot of material. Advanced have even more. It's the people in the middle. There's not really a lot of that, right? And that I've noticed that, and personally, when I'm learning a language, like you kind of get that plateau. How do you get past that? Well, this guy was very creative. He was able to use AI to construct the conversations about, that an intermediate person would understand, and then he basically copied and pasted into, a voice generator, so he would be able to listen to these custom conversations. I think there's a lot here we're gonna see kind of over the long haul be very transformative here. And there's also, persuasive type of prompts, right? Like, argue for the importance of renewable energy, right? This is using kind of all the things that, go back thousands of years in terms of rhetoric and debate and use those tools. We think that's very subjective, but no, there's actually a lot of science behind that. And Lord knows if you go to a bookstore, look online for books about sales, there's shelves and shelves and shelves, pages and pages and pages of search results on sales because it is at its heart a very persuasive type of science. And then reflective, and this is the one I'm kind of on the fence, like, I don't know, right? Although I did try this prompt with ChatGPT and it gave me a very interesting response about how it was trained in terms of the data engineering work that went into it, right? But the whole idea here is, encourage contemplation and personal reflection. I don't know how you encourage personal reflection from an LLM, but that's a stretch. I may in future versions of this slide, I may actually get rid of that one. But you know what? There's still principles here, and I think this is ready for drywall, right? Clarity and precision. LLMs need precise language. This is no different than you and I when I'm talking. You need to be clear about what you're trying to say. How many times in your life have you had? Well, no, that's not what I said. What I meant was I did say that, right? Clarity and precision are something that are important in any use of language, particularly human language, right? Programming languages also have room for ambiguity, but we call those bugs. But I think human language, and the more advanced language you use, the more latent spaces there are for things to go sideways. And adding as much relevant context as possible will help limit hallucinations. Hallucinations in the context of LLMs are where it just starts making stuff up. And it's not true at all. And I think there's a real creative tension here between brevity and detail, because there are token limits in terms of how many tokens a particular LLM can process. But I think that's going to be fixed in the near future. I know, I want to say GPT-4 is about 32,000 tokens, and tokens is about 60 to 80% of a word. So, for instance, if I had 100,000 tokens, that's probably about, about 70. We'll say 70,000. Keep the math easy. 70,000 words. Now, Claude by Anthropic actually does have a kind of working context window of 100,000 tokens. I think that's going to be the next frontier in terms of, what we measure a good LLM to be. Another challenge is, again, ambiguity. I think there's going to be more to this, but you can't, if you have an ambiguous prompt, you're going to get an output that you can't really control, right? Not control, control is not the right word. You're going to get unexpected results. Sometimes those are going to be good unexpected results, but more often than not, they're going to lead to hallucinations and factual inaccuracies. There's also ethical implications here, and this deserves an entire talk onto its own. But just know that whenever you're dealing with AI, you should always have ethics, or the thought of ethics, kind of in your mind. And when it comes to best practices, and I always squirm when I hear best practices for a new type of technology, because I don't think the paint has not dried yet in this, right? This is still a very fast-moving, very dynamic space. But I think there's three things here that we can kind of say that would be best practices, right? An iterative approach, right? Take an iterative approach. Encourage your users, or whoever's doing this, to take time to refine prompts, right? No one's going to get the perfect prompt the first time. That's just not going to happen. I don't play golf, but I do know that a hole-in-one in golf is very rare. Possible, but very rare. Secondly, I would say user-centric design. And the term user here isn't always who you think it is, right? You want to think carefully about the use case. So, for instance, there was a car dealership south of Silicon Valley. Somebody was beeping, and I'm not really sure what. That's the problem when you have a lot of UPSs and stuff like that. User-centric design, a key aspect here is not just the users that are using the system, but also you have to set up guardrails. You need to think about the story was that this chatbot, which we assume it was based on GPT, but it was clearly based on the LLM, was on this car dealer website, and it basically, as some savvy user, managed to convince the LLM to give it a car for $1, and use certain words and phrases that made it seem like it was a binding contract legally. I don't know how that's going to end up, and I've never worked in the auto industry, but I do know that if you're selling a $52,000 product for $1, you're not going to be in business very long. So you have to think about the context in which the LLM is being used, and protecting the user, and the user and protecting everybody, right? The company has to be protected from being tricked into something like that. And then finally, again, I don't know if it's a best practice just yet, but I would say still think of it as an engineering discipline, right? It straddles that border of art and science. And it's important to think about that, because it's not quite an exact science, right? Because these are based on randomized mathematical computations, or stochastic. Wow. I'm not sponsored by Monster Energy Monster Energy drinks, but I might as well be. But it straddles that border of art and science. So think about that. Now, I do have a bunch of random thoughts, right? This is a new presentation. I kind of did this, and with the kids being home all last week, I really didn't have quite a lot of time to kind of formalize this. So, but you are getting the fresh feed from this fresh stream of consciousness. You can use LLMs to make prompts. You can actually say, hey, can you help me write a prompt that will do that? and it will do that. And I've used that. It's fantastic. It's a little meta, or sometimes it feels like you're dividing by zero, right? You're feeding the thing into itself, but you actually do get quite a bit. There's also this notion of zero shot versus few shot. So a bunch of team members at Red Hat they're having a conference on like a sales conference in the APAC region, and they are in Bali. And as I look at the 6 inches of snow on my driveway, I kind of wish I had somehow gotten a ticket there. But an example would be zero shot would be, hey, what's the weather in Bali this type of year? It's actually really nice. Versus, few shot, which is, if I say, if I were going to Bali, what types of food would I like to eat? Now, clearly, I like a lot of food. But if I wanted to say, like, hey, I only like burgers, I only like barbecue, blah, 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 blah. That would be few shot, where I would give it examples of types of things I want. And then the LLM would, for lack of a better term, learn the constraints about when I say, hey, where could you recommend me to get something to eat? It's also not just text anymore. It's movies, images as input. Saw on a previous live stream where I had taken an image of a snowy day in Arlington, Virginia, from a local news site, and I said, hey, can you describe this and make this an image prompt for me? And I did, and I pasted it into another program, and it produced a similar looking image. Not exactly the same, but very similar. And you can also take that, and you can I actually use Pika to animate the scene, and animate it out to about a 15-second video. Very impressive what it was able to infer, right? That there's a car slipping down the road and things like that. And different LLMs may react differently. I tested this all out with ChatGPT, GPT-4. I didn't try it with Bard. I didn't try it with Claude by Anthropic. They may react differently. They've been trained differently. They may have a different structure. They may have learned different things, different patterns. I don't think we're at the point where we can definitively say that this foundation model and that foundation model are going to operate the same way. I don't think that's the case yet. And token length, right? I don't think this is going to be a problem much longer, just because everybody in the field on this, in the research field, is working to expand the token length. But if you are using the ChatGPT API, you are charged by how many tokens you send up and how many get generated back. If you're using the website, you basically, if you use ChatGPT Plus, it's an all-you-can-eat plan. You don't really have to think about that. I mean, you do have to think about it only has a certain context window that it'll remember. But you tend not to think about it in kind of day-to-day uses. Now, if I wanted to get I wanted to upload as a PDF to it, the entire contents of the novel War and Peace, then clearly it's going to be, I'll only have a fraction of that as my token memory in my context window. Now there are tricks to get around that, summarize it, right? You can kind of reduce that. I don't think this is going to be a problem much longer, honestly. Like, Anthropic has hit Claude to 100,000 tokens. I've heard rumors that of 250,000 to 500,000 for future versions of GPT. I don't know if that's true. It's just kind of what I heard. I don't think it's going to be a problem much longer. What will be a problem for very much longer, probably forever, are the ethical considerations that you have to keep in mind when you're building out these LLMs. That's just something to consider. So don't have time for a demo today, but I did find some really good stuff. There's a really good tutorial as part of the free Code Camp program on YouTube, where they, Anya Kubo, I think that's how you say her name, goes through kind of, describing the various concerns and things like that. This is a very new field, right? I would say prompt engineering, the first, when ChatGPT launched, the first term was that got crazy was LLM. The second term that became very popular and wildly popular would probably be prompt engineering. Still very new. LinkedIn Learning has a bunch of courses. Pluralsight has a bunch of courses. There's actually promptingguide.ai has a pretty good documentation on what they recommend. But this is very much a moving target and an advancing space. So with that, I will end the stream, and perhaps next time we can kind of maybe do a little more demos. Let me know. I know Andy and I are working on some things for this year. We hope to announce very soon, but we'll find out. So with that, I will end the stream. Say thank you very much for those who are joining live. Hey, put down hashtag live if you're watching this live, hashtag replay if you're watching this in the replay, and I will play the outro video. You have a good one.